Let's get into our new faces and new places. We got a lot of guys here. This is going to be 2 episodes. Today, we're going to talk about quarterbacks and running backs. And then next week, we're going to talk receivers and tight ends. But let's get right into it here with quarterbacks. All right, we got some guys that are some new faces and new places. I think the biggest name, the most exciting thing, maybe not necessarily for his fantasy value, but I think what he's going to do to the other players on the team.
Yeah.
That's what we have to look at. It's not just about having these guys on your team. It's about what do they do with the surrounding receivers, the surrounding running backs and tight ends, and how do they affect them? All right, Aaron Rodgers, A-Rod, baby. Aaron Rodgers, yes, from the Green Bay Packers, is now the quarterback with the New York Jets. Frankie, break it down for us. What kind of impact are we looking at? I'm very excited about this team this year and having Aaron Rodgers on that team. I think it's beautiful. They're making a run here. They've got a good 2 years, I think, with Aaron Rodgers to really make a run. How are we looking here? What's it going to do to us?
I think it's going to be game changing. I really do, for the Jets, for fantasy, for those guys that are on the Jets from last year. Just Aaron Rodgers, what we saw even out of the preseason game with him coaching, he has a different feel about him. He looks different. He feels different. He's giving off a different energy, right? It's probably due to the dark retreats and drinking some ayahuasca tea and shit. But at the end of the day, John, I expect big things. I expect huge things from Aaron Rodgers, actually. Last year, he had 263 total fantasy points. What does that mean, guys? Well, he averaged 14.7 points a game. Not good. But what it is interesting, though, is his ADP is 111. You can get Aaron Rodgers dirt cheap.
At the end of your draft. Yeah, I mean, he could be one of your last picks. Yeah.
Literally. I mean, we're talking 11th round, like 10th round, not 11th round, 10th round, 9th round at this point, if you wanted to in a 12-man league. And so, I mean, he's the 12th ranked QB. So in a 12-man league, right, you can get him as number 12. John, I am telling you right now, he is not going to end up the 12th quarterback overall this year. There's no way with what we're seeing. I mean, you have Breece Hall coming back. Everything is pointing to them potentially signing Dalvin Cook, which is going to take a lot of pressure off him. They have a reinforced offensive line. And then when you talk about the other weapons, Garrett Wilson, John, this is your guy. You've been loving this dude since day one last year. We talked about him very highly in the rookie review as well last year. And John, Garrett Wilson can absolutely be a top 10 guy. No question about it. Aaron Rodgers raises his ceiling extremely high. And I also love Allen Lazard. You can get Allen Lazard, which we'll talk about in the next episode, right? Part 2. But where he's being drafted, John, is incredible. You can get so much value for a guy that can end up being an excellent flex piece for you or even trade bait because of that already connection coming in, right? Corey Davis, in my personal opinion, is slowly going to be worked out, is going to be phased out, right? There's no hype about him. We're hearing more hype about Randall Cobb, for my God, than Corey Davis at this point, which is pretty nuts. So for me, man, Aaron Rodgers being on the Jets is salivatingly awesome. I love it. I think there's so much fantasy value here across the board. I couldn't be more thrilled.
That's another stack that I think is interesting. You can get him, you can punt on quarterback. You could take Garrett Wilson at a very high price, but I think he's going to return that value.
Yeah.
You know, that I'm very excited about Garrett Wilson and Aaron Rodgers having that connection. I don't think Aaron Rodgers is going to light up the fantasy stats, but I think he's going to help them really win a lot of games. I mean, the leadership and the things, I really like where he is. You're absolutely right. His vibe, his whole mental, state, I love where he is, and he's really showing some good leadership on this really, really young, promising team. I think it was a match made in heaven. I think it really is beautiful.
It looks like he's having fun again, John.
He knows he's got a couple of years left. He knows he's a Hall of Famer. As soon as he retires, 5 years later, the dude's going to be wearing a gold jacket. He knows all of these things. Yeah. So I think, he really wants to ride off into the sunset and see what he can do with this young team. And man, he should be excited because he's got some serious talent around him, man. It's really, really cool to see. I love it. All right, cool. Let's move on here. Another quarterback, Derek Carr. This is interesting. Derek Carr goes from Vegas. He's now in New Orleans. Derek Carr, he's a good quarterback. In my mind, look, he was able to support Devontae Adams. He was able to support multiple receivers on that team. Mac Hollins, Darren Waller. We've seen him put up pretty good fantasy numbers. And not only that, we've seen him be able to support a good fantasy cast. Now he's got Chris Olave, which everybody, just like Garrett Wilson, they're going right in that same range there. I think everybody's extremely excited about Chris Olave. He's got Michael Thomas, which, again, who the fuck knows what's going on there, but he could be a surprise. I don't think you're going to make him your champion like you did last year.
No.
But
Shit.
yeah, but interesting piece. We just talked about the 3 running backs that they've got in the backfield there. Talk to me, Frankie. How are you feeling about Derek Carr with his transition to New Orleans?
You're not going to take him in a 12 quarter or in a 1 quarterback 12-man league. Like, you're not, Derek Carr is going to be on the waiver, right? Unless you love it, you're a Saints fan and you're just like, no, I want a piece of the Saints. Whatever, do your thing. 2 quarterback league, John, love it. Love it. Right, because you can wait on him. He had 254 fantasy points last year. If you remember what I said with Aaron Rodgers, he had 263. So he's not that far behind. And his ADP is 145. What that means is, guys, so late. Yeah. Now, in a 2 quarterback league, it won't be a 145, right? So he's going to move up quite significantly at that point because of the value of the quarterback. But he averaged 15.4 points a game. And so for a second quarterback, guys, that's gold. That's really good. I mean, unless you're going right quarterback in the front first couple rounds there, right? But then you're having to really piece together some running backs, some receivers, and hopefully something happens. But for me, John, this is interesting because what it does for the rest of the team, I actually think this is a significant improvement for Olave, for Michael Thomas, for Alvin Kamara. I mean, we're talking like from Jameis Winston. We're talking from Taysom Hill, right?
Andy Dalton and Taysom Hill. And right? I mean, like, it's been a carousel since Drew Brees left. Yeah.
I mean, significant improvement. And their defense is excellent. And John, you mentioned the key point. Their opponents that they are playing this year are dog shit. If you go back down through that list that you mentioned, there's no Josh Allen, there's no Jalen Hurts, there's no Patrick Mahomes, there's no, right? They're not playing these top echelon teams. The best ones that they're going to be playing, in all honesty, are going to be the Vikings and Detroit, pretty much, outside of a few others, right? And
who both have terrible defenses. Terrible defenses.
Detroit's working their way to getting a better defense, but the Vikings, right, are really bad from a defensive perspective right now. So you're telling me that Derek Carr now walks in from a insanely difficult division in AFC West with the Chargers, the Broncos, the Chiefs, right, and the Raiders, right, but when he played there, to now walking into, I'm going to say it, Cream Puff Central. You know what I mean? And now you have the schedule that allows for that. And you're giving him, there's no Devontae Adams on this team, but you're giving him a good surrounding cast. I think Olave is going to benefit immensely from this. And also, I really like the tight ends here, John. There's a slew of them that they have now, right? Foster Moreau, which we'll talk about. They also have Juwan Johnson, and they also have Taysom Hill. So depending on who ends up working their way to tight end 1, I love that. We saw what Derek Carr did with Darren Waller. I think that it's going to be replicated here. So for me, man, I'm actually really excited to see what the Saints can do. They definitely have an excellent defense that is going to be able to hold opponents. I think if they give Derek Carr the shot to open it up, man, I mean, again, he had 3,500 passing yards last year. I only see this getting better this year with the division in the schedule that they're playing. So for me, man, in a 2 quarterback league, I personally am targeting the hell out of Derek Carr to get my number 2.
I think it's as safe as you can get. And what I like to do in a 2 quarterback league, we talk about stacks. That's kind of a theme today.
Stack attack.
The Derek Carr and the Chris Olave stack in a 2 quarterback league. I love that. I love stacking my second quarterback in double quarterback leagues or super flexes because you can plan for it. He's not getting drafted. He's so late that you can say, all right, I've got Olave, so now I'm going to target Derek Carr down here, and you'll see when you need to be able to take him. But I like that too. Yeah, excellent, man. Yeah, I think I think he's a good pick this year. I think he's going to help Chris Olave, and I think he makes we talked about who he's playing. He went from being the worst quarterback in his division to the best quarterback in his division. I mean, think about that, really. It's mostly rookies and second-year guys in his division now. Oh, and Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield's in his division, All right, let's get to our number 3 guy. It feels like these guys almost just swapped teams, Yeah, so you got Jimmy Garoppolo, Jimmy Gorgeous, Jimmy Gorgeous. I love this guy. Now, Jimmy Garoppolo was the quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers. Now he is taking Derek Carr's place in Las Vegas for the Raiders. What do you see? Do you see things really like I almost see this as a zero net gain,
Totally.
really, of Jimmy Garoppolo stepping into where Derek Carr was? How is this going to affect the Las Vegas Raiders now?
I think you're exactly right, John. I think it's a net zero gain, not negative, not positive. It's truly just okay. We got a guy that's potentially a game manager type of dude who's going to be able to move the ball down the field. And the reason why I think this is interesting for Devontae, because I don't think this is a loss for Devontae by any means. We saw Jimmy G really feed Debo Samuel. And so, right, they're different guys. I mean, Devontae's way better, in my opinion, than Debo Samuel. So it will even bode better for Jimmy G in getting them the ball. And they don't have Darren Waller there anymore. And so now this opens up the floor even more so for that of Devontae Adams. And I believe they also signed Jacoby Myers, right? Who's going to be there. And they also have, right, the naked fucking mole rat and Hunter Renfro. So, like, he has a good supporting cast. So for me, man, I'm looking at this to your point. I don't think this is going to change much for anybody. And I think Jimmy G is going to walk in and be a very good, serviceable second quarterback that you can plug and play in a two quarterback league.
Yeah, and he's healthy.
Yeah.
That's the fact that he's healthy and going to be on the field immediately. It moves Devontae Adams up for me. I think Devontae Adams is just being slept on, man. I mean, is there another receiver that's being drafted in at the turn, basically first, second round turn,
crazy,
that could be the wide receiver 1 overall?
No,
it's Devontae Adams. I mean, it really is. So yeah, the fact that Jimmy G's healthy and going to be throwing him the ball, I love it.
And and John, real quick too, Jimmy G last year, guys, before he got hurt, he had 18 total touchdowns and 4 interceptions. 18 total touchdowns and 4 interceptions. Very efficient. Very efficient.
Yeah. And he's been able to support multiple receivers with Brandon Ayuk and Debo
and Kittle.
With Kittle, with McCaffrey. I mean, he's thrown the ball. He's spread it all around too. So if Josh Jacobs can kind of get his head right, I think he's in for a really big season as well. But I think it's going to be the Devontae Adams show. I think it really helps him out, man. I think he's going to have even more of a target share than he's had in the past, which sounds impossible. All right, let's get to a couple of these other guys here, Frank, and just touch base. These guys aren't guys you're going to draft. These guys are hopefully guys you're not going to have on your team or have to have. Maybe you'll plug them in in a 2-quarterback league or if there's an injury. But you should just be aware that these guys are where they are because there's a couple of receivers that it might affect here. Baker Mayfield looking like he's going to be the starter for Tampa Bay. Does that help? Does that hurt? You're looking at Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. They're kind of off my board. Does that sound crazy to you? With Baker throwing them the ball and Brady being gone and their offensive line not quite what it used to be. How do you feel about Baker being in Tampa Bay?
I don't think that's crazy to say that they're off your board by any means. I think if you can get them for dirt cheap, like Mike Evans is going right now. I mean,
it's late. You're not paying for these guys, really.
So, I mean, if you can snag them as your flex and then they end up performing, right? Mike Evans has had, 9 straight seasons of 1,000 yards. Yeah. So if he can replicate that somehow, some way with Baker or Kyle Trask or something crazy, awesome. You got a good value for a good flex and maybe you can trade piece him together for something big. But no, man, I think it's going to be pretty even keel. Honestly, I think we should probably expect what we have seen previously in terms of play that Baker Mayfield has done for his other receivers, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's not real sexy, but I think they're going to have a decent floor. But I think it really caps the upside.
I think it helps Rachaad White. That's who I do think it helps from a dump off perspective. So I do think that could raise Rachaad White's value a bit.
That's a good point. All right, and then we've got a couple of quarterbacks here that are with new teams, and they're backing up high draft pick rookies here. We've got Gardner Minshew. Love this guy. He's bringing his swagger and his moxie to Indianapolis, and he's going to, we assume, we don't really know if Anthony Richardson's going to be the starter at this point. We assume that that's going to happen, and Gardner's going to be his backup. So that's pretty interesting to keep an eye on. This is a guy who could see some playing time this year. So think about him in a 2-quarterback league, especially off the waiver wire. Andy Dalton, the Red Rocket, the guy still playing here. He's going to be in Carolina backing up Bryce Young. So that's pretty interesting. Next guy, Jacoby Brissett. He was good. Okay, Jacoby Brissett is the best backup in the league in my opinion. But he's in Washington now. That's interesting. They've got Sam Howell, their rookie that they've got here. We
Second year now.
Our second year. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Now we're assuming that he's going to be starting, but this is Riverboat Ron Rivera here, and he's already come out and said, "Don't sleep on Jacoby Brissett." When the head coach comes out and says not to sleep on the backup quarterback, that makes you go, okay, that's interesting. So and we also know that he's not very patient with his quarterbacks.
No.
If Sam Howell's not getting it done, we'll see Jacoby Brissett in the game. Definitely. They will make a change, and I expect that. I expect Brissett to start a handful of games for sure. Does this? Would you rather see Brissett than Howell when it comes to Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson?
I'm going to be a hot take. No. And I say that because I loved watching Sam Howell at UNC. And had he come out a year before, he would have been a first round pick. So I think giving Sam Howell a year to develop, I'm excited actually to see Sam Howell play, knowing that we probably saw the ceiling of Jacoby Brissett. Now, it was a good ceiling, right? What he did with Amari Cooper, Terry McLaurin could absolutely eat. But I'm excited to see Sam Howell, and then from Jacoby, to your point, I definitely think he's going to play at some point in time. But I'm excited to see Sam Howell.
Yeah. I mean, I think Terry McLaurin. I think the Amari Cooper comparison. I think that's perfect. That the year that Amari Cooper had last year, that's what I'm expecting with Terry McLaurin this year. I mean, really, just a solid wide receiver too, a guy that you feel great about putting in your flex if you can do that. All right, let's get on to a couple other guys. Marcus Mariota is in Philly now. Sam Darnold is in San Francisco. Taylor Heineke is in Atlanta. Now, that's interesting because this is another guy who could end up getting some playing time this year. Yeah, with Desmond Ridder, who's definitely a question mark. So Taylor Heineke could be interesting. Keep an eye on him as well. All right, there's the quarterbacks. Let's get to some running backs. Now, these guys you are going to be drafting, and these guys you are going to be starting. Let's start off with the number one here.